Hi everyone, my name is Sarah Yao and I'm a cybersecurity technical specialist within the data security space. And today we're going to be talking about how we can help you meet your audit and compliance needs with Guardium. With privacy regulations coming out left and right, having more and more states coming out with their own, and most likely we'll probably see one at the federal level at some point. Companies across the board have been struggling to filter through all of the legalese, which only gives you criteria to be met without any suggested tools. So it's basically like giving you a set of problems without too much of an indication of how you should solve them. The good news is that most compliance regulations have the same set of data they're looking for. And Guardium can catch the traffic from the databases and leverage that data against any number of regulations. There are also built-in tools to help you get set up quickly for specific regulations. So before we dive into our use case, I just wanted to bring up a few questions that I want you to think about. The first one is, what kinds of compliance regulations does your company have to worry about? So I'm based in California, and CCPA just went into effect at the beginning of this year. So that's definitely been top of mind with the clients that I've been working with. Then there's also GDPR, SOX, HIPAA, PCI, the list goes on and on. And the next question is, what is your auditing process? Like, how manual is your process? Are you juggling spreadsheets? Does it shut down your normal security business for 2 weeks while you gather all the data? Or how often do you have to do all of that? And what if we told you that you could have all of your audit reports ready to go in minutes? So now that you have those things in mind, let's introduce our use case for today. Your manager tells you that the company is being audited for CCPA, and another peer company is fresh off an audit that resulted in a fine. So to make sure that we're ready to go on compliance, upper management is asking for information on access to sensitive information by privileged users. So the question is, how can we show what's necessary and sufficient? So now we're going to actually jump into Guardium and see how we can utilize compliance monitoring workflows and audit trail reports to answer that question. So since we're focusing on compliance today, from our Guardium splash screen, we'll click on Set Up Compliance Monitoring. And this will take us into the compliance summary page of what we call the Smart Assistant, which will help us quickly configure monitoring for GDPR, CCPA, and other security and privacy regulations. So if we look over here at this particular tile, which is focused on CCPA, we can easily see at a high level what's going on with our CCPA monitoring. And it looks like, based off of these nice green check marks we have here, that we are scanning for sensitive data, monitoring is enabled, and we've got our sensitive objects, applications, and users groups all populated and ready to go. So from here, let's take a look at the details pane for CCPA. So right now we're looking at the Summary tab. And this gives us an overview of how many databases we're monitoring and the number of pre-built policies and reports that come out of the box with Guardium for CCPA. Then below, we can see a list of important groups that are being used for those same policies and reports. And if we take a closer look at some of the groups here, I can see personal data sensitive objects and personal data authorized users. And if we think back at our use case of being able to get information on access to sensitive information by privileged users, it sounds like we're headed in the right direction with the groups we've got here. Then in the Databases tab, you have a more detailed view of the different databases you're monitoring for CCPA. With the Policies tab, you have the Discovery Scenario, which is all of the different types of sensitive data Guardium will be scanning for within your data sources that are specific to CCPA. And then we have the Security Policy, which, among other things, will log full details and alert on access to personal data sensitive objects by privileged users. Then, if we move on to the Reports tab, this shows you all of the predefined CCPA reports that come out of the box with Guardium. So those reports you need for upper management, they're right here. And we'll take a closer look at those reports a little later. So now that we've gone through the details pane for CCPA, where the setup was already configured, let's see how quick and easy it is to set up a new compliance monitoring workflow for a different compliance regulation. So if we click on Setup Compliance Monitoring, we can see that we're brought to a workflow page with 5 simple steps. The first step here just explains what the workflow process does. So we can click Next. In step 2, we'll want to pick which out-of-the-box compliance policy we want to configure. And the ones in here that are showing, those are the ones I haven't already configured. So I'm going to pick GDPR. And just as a side note here, custom policies are basically just policies you've created or modified outside the predefined policies that come out of the box with Guardium. So then, now that we've picked GDPR, let's move on to step 3. And here we choose which databases we want to monitor with that policy. So I'll just select them all. Then moving on to step 4, we'll select which databases we want to scan for sensitive data. So tables containing sensitive data would then be added to the sensitive objects group for monitoring. But in our case, we'll just skip that for now since we're just going through this setup really quick. And then in step 5, it summarizes everything that will be running in the setup. And you can see we've got 4 green check marks here. That looks good. But we've got one little warning sign that says populate groups. It looks like we've got one group that we need to populate, so let's view the details. So we're back in this Smart Assistant with GDPR groups, and we see here this little red dot. And we've got 0 members in our personal data authorized client IPs group. So if I wanted to, I could actually go in and populate this group right from this screen. And once you populate the groups, then you would actually be able to run the setup. So let's cancel out of this now. So once you have the compliance monitoring set up, another thing that would help you out with your manager's request is to take a look at the CCPA Compliance Accelerator. So if we click on CCPA Compliance, we'll get an overview of the regulation and how you can utilize Guardium to help you with it. If we go back here, we can open up the report section, and here we can actually see the 17 different out-of-the-box CCPA compliance reports. So from here, we can also easily build out a dashboard to have easy access to your most important reports for CCPA. So we'll go to My Custom Dashboards and then click on this CCPA Overview Dashboard. So these are the different types of information that are captured by Guardium. And oftentimes, the information captured in these reports also apply to other regulations as well. And if we start to look at the different reports, we see that we have a lot of visibility into what upper management was looking for. So who's accessing the CCPA sensitive objects? So we can see that in our personal data objects audit trail report here. You can also see when they're accessing them. You can even view a report that specifically looks at off-hours access. So here is our after-hours access to personal data. And then there are reports that are specifically on privileged users, like this data subject access audit trail one. And let's take a closer look at this one. So if we click to maximize, and this particular report has a specific condition that only shows the activity of the members that are in that authorized users group that we talked about earlier. And we can see that Bill has been performing some select stars on credit card tables, which are clearly part of the sensitive objects group that we were talking about before as well, which perfectly ties into our use case of getting the necessary information on access to sensitive objects by privileged users like Bill and Dale. So we can actually take this information in the dashboard and place it in an automated workflow that can include sign-offs or route it to another source for processing. And I've set up an automated workflow to send out 3 of these CCPA reports in this dashboard. to auditors daily so that they can view them and then sign off on the results. So let's go over to our to-do list and view the latest report. So here we can see our 3 reports, and I'll expand out this first one to see what's inside. So we've got a graph of the number of executed grant and revoke commands over time. And then if we continue scrolling down, we'll see the full details of the report. And then if you go back up, once you're done reviewing all of the reports, you can go and sign the results if you're satisfied with how they look, or you can escalate it to somebody else within the organization if you think further action needs to be taken. And one thing to remember is, once you set up the workflow, all of this is completely automated, which means you don't have to be pushing spreadsheets to get your reports out to internal or external auditors, or in our use case today, upper management. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and close out of this report. And that concludes the demo portion of this presentation. So if we go back to our use case slide, let's quickly recap and see if we were able to do what upper management has asked. So they wanted to see information on access to sensitive information by privileged users, and we needed to make sure to show what was necessary and sufficient. And here's what we saw today. First, we saw how to quickly start monitoring for CCPA compliance by using our simple 5-step compliance monitoring workflow. Then, setting up the monitoring piece allowed us to get data into our predefined CCPA reports that showed us a wealth of information, including what's going on with access to sensitive information by privileged users. And while you have access to see all of the data that Guardium has to offer, upper management most likely doesn't need to see all of it. So we also saw the result of creating an audit process workflow so that you could automate sending out those 3 reports that showed what was necessary and sufficient to prove CCPA compliance to the folks in upper management. And that's the end of the use case portion of today's episode of Data Security Tuesdays. So I hope you found this useful, and I'll hand it back over to our host to wrap things up and see if anyone has any questions. Thank you all so much for listening today.